Go ahead. Is it rolling? Okay. Hey kids, welcome to my first attempt at a YouTube video. This one's going to be infotainment. I don't expect you to do anything with this. I personally love learning. I also love doing. I can't sit around for long without doing something. I am planning to disable comments on this, so sorry to all you trolls out there. If you're a microbiologist or a virologist or something and you have scientific evidence that I don't know about, feel free to private message me, and if I think what you're teaching me is valid, then I'll pass that on to my students. Otherwise, this is for me just to try making a YouTube video and do something about this current coronavirus. So what we're talking about today is copper. And why I think this may have some validity is because the ancients knew all about copper and used it. Ancient Egyptians, ancient Chinese, they all recognized the value of copper to ward off various bacteria and diseases. Here's a few examples. We're going to be using this stuff. It repels slugs and snails out of your garden. There's some kind of chemical reaction that happens. Also, treated lumber. This color comes from copper sulfate. That's been out in the weather for a long time. Here's the side that's not as weathered, but this slows down rot. This stuff will still rot over time, but it lasts much longer because of copper sulfate. Also, bottom paint that they put on boats, the thing that prevents algae and barnacles from growing on the hull, is copper sulfate or something like that. But anyway, it's copper based. Roof shingles. If you're willing to spend extra money, you can get asphalt roof shingles that have copper particles embedded into them, because then moss and whatnot won't tend to grow on those roofs, at least not as much. So what I've learned is that some bacteria and viruses will actually die on contact with copper. Apparently the coronavirus, as far as I can tell, it will still live on copper for a few hours, but that's a lot better than multiple days on other surfaces like stainless steel. So what I'm doing is probably overkill for home. But come on, take a look. So we're gonna talk a little bit more about copper pettings in a second, but got some copper tape and a penny on the paper towel dispenser. Also on the soap dispenser here, we've got copper tape and pennies. And on the faucets, so touch the penny. It might be good luck for real now. Let's talk about pennies though. So sometime in 1982, pennies are no longer copper. They're copper plated, but they're mostly zinc, and I don't think those are going to do the job. So for US pennies, you're looking for something 1981 or older. Again, some 82 pennies have copper, but for sure 81 and older are like 98 point something % copper. The Canadians, they don't use pennies anymore, but up till 1996, if you have any Canadian pennies, 96 and older are almost pure copper. And the reason they stopped doing it is because the copper itself was worth almost a penny, and then with all the manufacturing and the minting process, it costs almost 2 cents to make a 1 cent coin. So that's why they switched to zinc, much cheaper. So here I tested this yesterday. This is what we're gonna do. Now I don't think the copper tape is not gonna stand up to hundreds and hundreds of touches per day. I think it'll go through. But what I've got underneath this copper tape, I've got some more solid copper, and you're going to see that process here. Also worth noting that my son, my 19-year-old son that works at Home Depot, I've already asked him to wash his hands before he leaves work, and then to wash his hands in the garage before he enters the house. So the garage door from into the house is brass, which is almost 70% copper. It's an alloy, and the biggest component in brass is copper, but it has to be naked copper. Most copper has a coating on it, like a lacquer or some other clear coat. So ours is already chipping because the house is 27 years old, so the lacquer's already kind of beat up. We're gonna go ahead and sand that lacquer off so it's bare. Okay, so this copper pipe, it's pretty soft and you could easily cut it with a hacksaw. But if you have a tubing cutter, these will give you a nice square cut. So this is a plumber's tool. So you get in between the rollers there, and it's kind of like a pizza cutter a little bit. And then that scores it, and then each time you go around, you just tighten it up a little bit more. Anyway, we're having video difficulties, and I think I was starting to tell you that we're gonna ask my 19-year-old that works at Home Depot to wash his hands at school or at work before he leaves, and then in the garage when he gets home. So now we just need to cut this open. Tape is really easy to use. It's peel and stick, and it's very thin. And my concern is that that thin tape may not have enough ions. I think the copper ions are like bullets for the microbes, and they zap them somehow. So we're gonna take this piece of pipe that I started manipulating, and we're just gonna wrap that around the door, and we're just gonna start just squishing it in place, wrapping it around. It doesn't take that long, but I'm probably not going to film the whole thing because it's a little bit tedious after a while. So I'm going to have my cameraman pause in just a sec, so slip joint pliers are nice for this. And just sort of wrap it around. And actually, before I close that, I'm going to want to put something on there called flux. It's a paste, because we're going to solder this into place using plumbing solder. So before I close that down completely, I'm going to get some flux. This stuff just, it helps the solder melt and flow. So I'm going to get that underneath. So this is the stuff found in the plumbing section, water-soluble paste flux. Just be generous with that stuff. And then we're gonna pause the video while I finish forming that, and I'm gonna clamp it with some small C-clamps. So the next thing you'll see is torch and solder. Okay. Hoorah, CVs. See, we get her done. Alright. So make sure your solder is lead free, because that can cause other problems. And try not to burn the door. You're going to want to get that flux boiling. Come on. What a mess. It's tricky to solder. I think that handle's just a big heat sink, and the clamps are too. It's a lot trickier than just sweating pipe normally. Kind of ugly, but we'll clean it up. Do not touch that, even with gloves on. That's pretty toasty right now. So cut, we'll clean it. There she is, kind of ugly, but kind of cool looking too, in a Mad Max sort of way. So it's 6 memory cloth here. Clean up some of that so there's nothing pokey or sharp. I'm probably gonna wrap it in copper tape just to make it look a little prettier. But I'll work on this some more with the sandpaper and just clean it up. Get rid of some of the gloves. And remember, even through the gloves, this thing's still warm. I'll work on that a little bit more, but I want to show you guys the next thing. So if these videos work out, I already just sent you a notification in Google Classroom to start saving cardboard, because we're going to try to make some cool stuff with cardboard. So hopefully this works, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks. Stay well.